Hey everyone, welcome back to Chipstock Investor.
I'm Nick, and this other person talking is Kasey. We were told we needed to start introducing ourselves every single one of these, so that's all we're doing here. Welcome back to Chipstock Investor. Kasey, what are we talking about today? It's not a chip stock, but it's definitely a beneficiary of semiconductor and specifically data center technology.
Let's talk about Miami International Exchange, or MIAX. Even if a company does not have a lot of historical financial data available, such as a company like Miami International Exchange did not because they just had their IPO, we still do a lot of research with our friends over at fiscal.ai, the sponsor of today's video.
They have a great AI chatbot tool that has been custom trained to know all about financial matters. And it can be a great resource if you're digging into a company like this, like Kasey said, with limited historical financial data. But there's still lots of information out there about the company that can be aggregated and help you with your research journey, especially for these hot IPO stocks that really deserve a lot of care and attention before you make a final decision to buy, if you decide to do so at all.
They have a new enterprise plan as well for all you pros out there, or maybe wannabe pros.
Maybe aspiring pros is a better way to phrase that.
Probably. And you can get 15% off even that enterprise plan with the link here on the screen or in our video description, fiscal.ai/CSI. Miami International Exchange. I did not know anything about this company and its IPO before today.
But you followed the process, and now not only do you know what this stock ticker is, you could probably talk any retail investor to death about MIAX.
I feel like that might be an overstatement, but let's get to it. You can think about MIAX as infrastructure for the financial sector. They're an exchange and they make buys and sells happen for not retail investors, but the big guys.
The really
big guys.
And a lot of the really big guys that you've never heard of. Yes, what you are looking at is our digital ads industry high-level chart from earlier this year. You're not seeing things incorrectly. Because the reason why we did this is because we already talked about this business model before. In exchange, there's lots and lots of business models out there that operate as a type of exchange. Visa and MasterCard are kind of a similar type of deal where they help facilitate something changing hands, and they handle the data, especially of those transactions that take place between a buyer, in this case on the left, and a seller on the right. And there in the middle is where you find companies like Miami Exchange. In this case, it's money itself that's being exchanged, or a financial instrument, I should say, itself. And the buyers and sellers in this case, maybe there's not so much differentiation because it's not like the last slide was there's a certain type of buyer and a certain type of seller in the advertising market. In financial markets, it's kind of anything goes. It could be anybody on either side on any given day. But if you think about your broker that operates an exchange, that broker is working with retail customers, a company that provides liquidity, that does lots and lots of buys and sells to make sure there's liquidity. A clearinghouse, data providers, there's lots of in between here in the middle. And so Miami Exchange, specifically what they help exchange are predominantly financial derivatives, options, and futures contracts. They've built their technology mostly in-house. They've done some acquisitions along the road as well over the last decade. They're a digital exchange. They do have a trading floor that will be opening in Miami next month. Peers and competitors. These are some of the competitors that Miami Exchange goes up against.
And there's been a lot of consolidation in this area. So this company, Miami Exchange, saw an opportunity to create something brand new.
Yeah, CME Group, actually not a competitor at this stage. CME Group actually has an agreement with distributing MIAX's options and futures contracts, but specifically the ones they do list in their S1 filing, NASDAQ, CBOE, Intercontinental Exchange, which used to also own Euronext, but Euronext is now its own deal. That's the one that represents a lot of the exchanges in Europe, but Intercontinental Exchange is like the New York Stock Exchange. And then in the bottom right there are some other new upstart digital native, let's call it, exchanges that also are getting into the options and future contracts business. And maybe just another little fun thing here, just so we're tying everything back into the semiconductor industry, because it all boils back down to chips at the end of the day.
Yeah, market exchanges were definitely some of the first adopters of data center compute. And so if we had to put them in one place, we put them in the cloud and enterprise end market segment.
Yeah, these companies, this is one of the reasons why it is basically, for all intents and purposes, close to impossible for retail to outperform the market if you're trying to hypertrade. I think it's maybe less relevant than it was a number of years ago, but there was that Michael Lewis book, Flash Boys. Did you ever read that one?
No. Flash Boys?
Yeah, it's a Michael Lewis book about the high frequency trading, where, I mean, so back in the day, they would even do things like install server equipment just a little bit closer to the exchange than their competitors so that they could get better pricing on the trades. Now it's more about just algorithm driven. They all have very powerful equipment that's all very low latency, but this is the kind of stuff that Miami Exchange helps build for their trading customers.
Little timeline of events. Walk us through this.
Yeah, you can see they started a little over a decade ago, made some acquisitions. This is a little more notable here. In 2018, they started to bring this to a head. NASDAQ actually brought a patent infringement claim against Miami Exchange, but the court threw it out. And then it was permanently dismissed with prejudice in 2022, which laid the foundation for MIAX eventually having its IPO just last week. Another interesting and important point here, they do have an interesting way of raising equity that you should be aware of. If this is something that interests you at all, it's called an ERP, Equity Rights Program. What they do is they offer equity in exchange for a cash infusion into the business from some of their largest, most important trading customers. So by that, we can infer that these top owners of MIAX are probably also MIAX customers. Here's the revenue for the first half of 2025 from the top slide. 655 million, 21% year-over-year increase. However, the more important item here is when you take that revenue and subtract their cost of revenue, because a very, very large part of the revenue actually goes back to the traders themselves in the form of what's called a liquidity payment. Those liquidity payments were 390 million the first half of this year, up 9%. So at least they were able to keep those in check. You can almost kind of think of this as like the rebate that Visa and MasterCard offers its customers, the card issuing banks, as incentive for using their platform. This is not wholly dissimilar. This is like a market maker that's adding liquidity to a financial instrument by trading it. MIAX can incentivize them by offering them that liquidity payment, kind of like a rebate on their trading activity, to make sure that the options and futures contracts are moving and that there's a market there for other traders to come in and make use of. On an EBITDA basis and GAAP net income basis, not a lot going on here. We want to see what happens after their first couple of earnings reports. I think it'll be more meaningful. But on an adjusted EBITDA basis, at least for the sake of just getting a feel for where the business is at, you can see towards the end, they have adjusted EBITDA margin pegged at 45%. Let's see if that's sustainable. But it is in keeping with the other large exchanges. These are actually very highly profitable, lucrative businesses. Okay, here's the IPO. They raised nearly $400 million gross. The net proceeds will be a bit less than that. They're going to use a big chunk of that to pay off about $100 million in senior secured debt. And then the rest of the cash will just go to the balance sheet, which is good because they are slightly free cash flow negative, but let's see if they can flip the corner on that relatively quickly. And last slide, Kasey, this is your favorite slide.
The end. Yes. So here's the key points in the TLDR. The volume of trading on MIAX exchanges do continue to rise. Slowing revenue growth and frequent acquisitions are a risk for MIAX. And then we need to see more progress on their GAAP and free cash flow profitability. It looks like their debt payoff is going to be after that cash settles from the IPO, and they'll have plenty of cash on balance. As far as valuation goes, 16 to 17x on adjusted EBITDA basis. But the conclusion of the matter is we're going to take a small tracking position. Basically, we're going to take a very small nibble, even smaller than our starter position, just so that we can keep an eye on this one.
Think of it like when we bought 5 shares of Intel, a nice round $100 worth of Intel.
And we tracked it and we sold it.
Tracked it. We wanted to give Intel the benefit of the doubt. And yeah, it was still too early. Anyway, something similar with this, perhaps. It's interesting enough that we want to watch their progress for a quarter or two after the IPO and see what happens.